Here we go. The next Manhattan Borough President will have a significant impact on how we continue to view and utilize our streets and open space post-pandemic, and will wield substantial influence on shaping our public realm. This evening, we are honored to host 7 extraordinary leaders who are candidates for Manhattan Borough Presidents, and they are Lindsey Boylan, Elizabeth Caputo, Brad Hoylman, Ben Kallos, Mark Levine, Michael Lewin, and Kimberly Watkins. This forum will give us an opportunity to learn about each candidate's vision for bicycling and street safety, and it's being moderated by our own John Orcutt. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Ken, and welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in tonight. We have a great lineup of candidates and a great set of candidates in the race. In terms of their statements and positions that we know about on cycling issues, it's fair to say that all of them are our friends. And that, I think, along with the very existence of this forum and the discussion we had in March with mayoral candidates and the upcoming conversations we'll have in other boroughs, is a really good sign of the times that candidates are weighing in on cycling issues, safe streets issues, and feel the need to take proactive positions there. So we're gonna, really be able to dig into some details with our guests tonight. And we're really getting to a place in the city where the discussion is not about whether we're going to do something real for bikes in the city, but how we're going to make riding safe and accessible. So with that, I want to introduce our first candidate, Lindsey Boylan. Lindsey's worked on management of public space in Midtown, looks like with the 34th Street Partnership, if I'm not mistaken. Worked with some of us who were at DOT back in the day, pedestrianizing parts of Broadway and Herald Square, and has been Deputy Secretary for Economic Development and Housing for the state of New York, and has been on two different Manhattan community boards, which gives her some great background to become borough president. So, Lindsey, we really want to get into how we see the borough president's office relating to street safety and a better connected bike network. Fantastic placement, by the way, A+ already of your background. So why don't you just give us your thoughts on that? We've seen you tweeting a lot about these issues and being very upfront on them. So
Sure.
Have at it, please.
Sure. So I'll introduce you to Flash. That is my bike. I purchased it with my first tax return. I'd never had $700 in my account before. It's a Linus, and I named her after a New Yorker comic that I met when I managed Bryant Park, which was the same time I managed 34th Street Partnership operations. And I have to say, it is the only piece of furniture that has moved with me through 10 apartments in under 10 years in my busy time in New York City. And during that time, I spent my whole career in urban planning, because for me, the most exciting thing about my career and my passion is how to make cities work better for people and orient people closest to pain and closest to challenges to solutions. And so that's where I see biking coming in, because even when I was a young New Yorker, had no extra dollars, biking gave me a sense of flexibility and a sense of opportunity and optimism in the city and what I could do with it. And I think that in many ways mirrors what cycling has meant to so many people, including women and the women's movement originally. And interestingly enough, in the last year, the biggest group of bikers, new bikers, are women. I think in part it's because I can wear my yoga pants, which I'm wearing right now, and just hop around town and be working at the same time. I say that now because I think we're in a moment of opportunity, as you mentioned, John. I think we can't let this pass. And I view the borough president's job in Manhattan as the most important job for making this not only a bike-friendly city, but a truly livable city, which is intertwined with making this a bike-friendly city, frankly. We have to imagine a Manhattan that is for people, not for cars. And we have to have someone in the borough president's job, which is a management job, not a legislative job, which I want to emphasize that can implement the changes of car-free streets, accessibility, bus lanes, traffic calming, all of these things in a way that actually improves people's lives So we make it easy for them to transition to the decision of using bikes over cars, and using bikes and using mass transit over cars and Ubers and the like and taxis. And I think that's infinitely possible. Today, I both signed on to the 25 by 25 by Transit Alternatives, and I also put out my own transportation plan. And I did both of those things because I want people to know how passionate I am about these issues. And I think there's a false choice that is being made, but we have to overcome, that pedestrians and cyclists are in opposition, when in reality, traffic calming, alternatives to policing that involve security cameras, pedestrian-friendly streets are good for everyone. And that is a management job. And I'm the only one in this race who has spent their whole career thinking about these issues, including when DOT put out the pedestrianized parts of Broadway. They needed someone to make them actionable. And that was what I did as a kid in the Harold and Greeley Squares ones. And it was a great learning experience of my life. And it made me realize that in urban planning, there are people who make plans and there are people who implement them. And I'm an implementer. And I think that's my great opportunity. And one thing I'd add to the conversation is that we have an opportunity also to bring people in who've been left out. I think accessibility issues are so often perceived as at odds with cyclists, when in fact, mid-block sidewalk opportunities to get off for people biking. When we do traffic calming, it helps everyone. And I think there are a lot of opportunities left off the table. So I'm really excited to be here tonight and have this conversation. I couldn't be more passionate about biking issues. And my first real relationship before I met my husband, which is Flash, my bike. So I'm excited to be here. And thank you so much, John.
So Lindsey, when you talk about implementing and bike-friendly streets, I mean, if you look behind me, we have one of our poster children for what protected bike lanes tend to look like in much of the city today. And it's not universally a problem, but the city doesn't have a good template for protected bike lanes where there isn't room for a line of parked cars to set the streets off. So they use these plastic things that people just run over.
I saw it today. I saw it today, literally.
With absolute regularity. Yeah, you can actually pick those up and wave them around at press conferences, which I've done. But what does that look like to you then? How do we get bike friendly streets?
Well, I think a few things. So one thing I didn't mention, but is in both the 25 and 25 plan and my transportation plan is ending placard abuse. And even in my own office, having 60, 70 employees, we won't have any placards, myself included. I think we need to put people on community boards who subscribe to 25 and 25. I think the big issues are two areas. You have vehicles parked in unprotected bike lanes, which in many ways this is like, they don't even have those movable bollards, whatever they call them. We need to get more truly protected with cement casings and the like. But I think the biggest challenge even to that is that there's no real partnership, I would say, both to Department of Sanitation and Transportation. There's no big vision, because we could do all these things now. It's just that we need to get people on board with the vision of taking more of our streets over for cycling. I even see one of the big things, if we weren't showing this time of year, we'd be showing a big snow or ice, mound at the end of the block, and it would be the same issue, right? But I've talked to the Department of Sanitation about that, and the biggest issue there is they don't even have cleaning machines, or many of them, that can traverse those small bike lanes. So where we're going with this is needing bigger, more significantly protected bike lanes. I mean, that's the only way of the future. And that's also the way that we're going to accommodate both motorized bikes for people delivering food and the like, and also two-way cycling. We need to go to bigger bike lanes ultimately. I mean, we suffer from an issue of critical mass. And I think one of the great opportunities, as I mentioned when we started, is that this last year, we've had infinitely number of additional cyclists, right? And it's people who weren't cycling before, primarily women. And so we're already moving in that direction. We're moving in a direction of cities like Barcelona that have dealt with this with super blocks. And frankly, Manhattan has to be the hotbed for this additional, really pragmatic and aggressive response, because we're the grid, right? And this is the one area where we can actually do really big things. We can increase the size of bike lanes. We can truly protect them, because those movable bollards are truly movable, right? I literally was in a bike lane on, I want to say like 12th Street in the Village, and there was a fresh direct car in front of me going every single one.
This is 13th Street, the pair.
Okay, that maybe I was looking at it. It kind of, I think I went down that block today, frankly. And so I think there's we're dealing with a economy of scale issue right now, right? We need to get more people to do it, but it's hard to get more people to do it because some people perceive it as unsafe. So we have to do both things at once. We have to increase the number of bike lanes on avenues and cross town at major arteries. And we have to make much more normal the sense of how we use these things. I mean, I'll say it myself. I'll go through on a quiet street, a red light. I'll go down the wrong path, and that's a problem. We need to develop, because we don't have nearly as many people doing it. We think we can go beyond the boundaries, but we need to start to developing both the hard infrastructure and then the response to that as users. And the only way I see to really accommodate the interest in biking is to increase the lanes, to size-wise increase the number, and then reinforce the safety of those. And if it can't be in this interim period with truly protected bike lanes, you know what's better than those movable bollards is sizable tree planters. That's what we did in 34th Street when we did Broadway, because it's not going to take someone out if a car hits it, but it's certainly it's going to prevent someone from hitting a cyclist. And it feels a lot more protected than those movable bollards do.
Oh, absolutely. So these are designed not to damage a car. So there's very little,
exactly. Well,
there's very little disincentive. So
yes,
Lindsey,
yes.
let me ask, are there specific projects you want to, really become a champion for as BP?
Yeah, I think the traffic calming element of all of this is a fairly cheap comparatively reality. So one of the things I'm going to have when I become borough president, and again, it is a management, not a legislative job, is $100 million to give or take, depending on population by borough, to put into our communities. Being able to do things like significant size movable planters to reinforce protected bike lanes where we don't yet have the either buy-in or capital budget to create sizable traffic barriers. Those planters do two things: traffic calming, and they also do like beautiful interest for communities. And we have those all over the central business district. We have those in bids. I think a lot more of our communities deserve that, right? So all kinds of speed bumps, traffic calming, planters, the like. And I think that's a way to bring pedestrians. Like, I think one of the biggest political arguments and issues we have in the cycling community is that I find myself having to convince pedestrians, particularly older pedestrians and people with mobility issues, that we're on the same side. And we really are. And I think all these traffic calming, the bumps, the things that we use in urban planning, like just pretty day to day, are things that are really easy to integrate. So that's one. And then the other big one, beyond the 25 and 25 and massively increasing space, is accessibility and how we accommodate the uses of the bike lane. Because I think the biggest conversation right now that I'm hearing, even at the latest conference that I was at, and the great thing about biking everywhere is you start a conversation, right? The biggest concern people have is people delivering food and other things, and that's a markedly different use than pleasure cycling or cycling from one place to another. But we have to accommodate both. We have to be respectful of all the uses, and all of the uses improve the safety. So the only way to respond to that, particularly with mechanized bikes, e-bikes, the like, is to increase the number of bike lanes. I mean, so if you look at north-south Manhattan, truly speaking, on either side, you have 2 to 3 avenues of bike lanes, like east-west, right?
Well, this other piece behind me is the protected bike lane map.
Okay, so I'm thinking in my head.
It could be worse. It could be one of the other boroughs, but you can see the east side is a little thin. Uptown is, very,
It's very thin. It's
yeah.
very thin. So the only real protected, truly protected, when we think about it, like, that new bikers would be comfortable with, might even be, Hudson River Park, the greenways, right? Those are the new learners. So if you're a new learner, you start with the greenways. But if you're really going to use cycling as a part of your life, you have to go beyond the greenways, right? So what I'm saying is, it's fairly simple to give a little bit of real estate away if you have the political capital to get it, and you can convince people. We need more than, let's say, I kind of divide Manhattan east-west in two parts, right? We basically have, just mentally keeping it together, 2 avenues on either side. And that ends up meaning, and they're supposed to go north-south in essence, right? If we have connected bike lanes, that means that you basically have as arteries people competing for space. We need more bike lanes on the avenues. We need better education, like we've done with water, like we've done with energy, about appropriate bike use. We need traffic calming, and all of these things work together. And then frankly, we need to engage the e-bikers in the conversation. I was really dismayed and disheartened by
our time window is fairly brief.
Okay,
tonight,
I'll finish up. Okay.
Wait, but I have one important question. And since
Sure.
you've been on community boards, the borough president shapes community boards.
Yes.
Do you have any clear policy related to bikes and street safety in terms of how you will, sort of populate the community boards?
So I will be looking for a set of principles that we bring people on. I'm not looking for political support. I'm not looking for city council members' picks. I'm looking for people who will support, as a base level, 25 and 25 transportation alternatives, which is a pretty ambitious plan if you know it, which I'm sure you do. And then people who are really focused on bringing together issues of accessibility, both for biking and for mobility, because they really are one and the same issue, right? Like if you do traffic calming, if you bring down the speeds, if you create more pedestrian friendly space, you do better for cyclists too. So it's really those two areas. The base level of 25 and 25, I'm going to be looking at as a threshold. And then issues of livability are very much encompassed in how bike and pedestrian friendly our city is. So those are going to be basic thresholds for joining the community board.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
You tweeted from the street the other day about your commute. What is that commute?
It's
What are
wherever
the
I'm
rides?
supposed
What are
to
the rides
go.
you do regularly if you're not in an office these days?
I am a little bizarre because I was cycling right as Jeanette Sadiq-Khan for, I would say, like one of the great cycling, and not everyone loves the Bloomberg era, but I think cyclists love the Bloomberg DOT era, right? That was a great time. I was cycling, I think, as that all started, basically. So I cycle beyond the bike lane. So I've really had to retrain my mind to look at where the infrastructure is, because I kind of like the Wild West feel, obviously, or else I wouldn't be running for office, because it's a little crazy.
All right, so you're like a Bowery cyclist.
I go all over. I go all over. Yeah.
Cool. All right. I think we are out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Best of luck and have fun on the campaign trail. And
Thank you so much, John.
okay, talk to you later. Okay, we are charging ahead to our next time slot, our next candidate. And can we, there we go. It's Elizabeth Caputo. How are you, Elizabeth?
Hi, everyone. Hi, how are you all?
Elizabeth is a founder of New York City's Fund for Public Schools, works at the World Economic Forum, has done great service as multiple stints as chair of Manhattan's Community Board 7, now a candidate for borough president. Elizabeth, we want to just dive right in. How do you see the borough president's office relating to street safety and a better connected bike network?
Sure. So I just want to thank you, John, and everyone else from all the organizations who care about bike and why building back our city. I have lived and breathed this my entire career for 25 years of living and working in Manhattan since 1995. I have been a civic leader. I ran an organization that many of you are familiar with called Democratic Leadership for the 21st Century. I've worked in municipal infrastructure finance, And most importantly, I think for this world, I have been the chair of Manhattan's Community Board 7. I've served on the board since 2010. I remain on the board. I was the longest serving elected chair. One of the most proud accomplishments that I did was implement 3 bike lanes: Columbus Avenue, which was the first, Amsterdam Avenue, which was the second, and then most recently and tragically was Central Park West and that bike lane. And I look forward to talking to you about that throughout the course of the conversation this evening. Look, my career has bridged the public and private sectors, which I think are going to be critically important to building back this city, especially on issues related to transportation finance. I have worked on supporting all sorts of local projects. I have worked again on Community Board 7, which represents over 200,000 residents, not just as a member, but as an actual chair, where I've had to really deal with some complicated issues related to bike lanes and bicycles and transportation. I believe very strongly that whoever gets elected to this office, which is an executive office, not a legislative one, that there needs to be somebody who's willing to work with everyone across all communities to be able to get things done. And that's going to be what I do as representing you. I do have a bike, as you can see from my helmet. I bike all the way across town. I biked to a doctor's appointment earlier today over on the east side. There are things that that our city is not doing infrastructure-wise that we need to really help with. And I look forward to talking with you about those things this afternoon, this evening. I think a few things just related to street safety and better connected networks. Again, in addition to those 3 bike lanes, I brought City Bike to the Upper West Side under my tenure, where we had true community input. We brought a reduction of the speed limit below 20 miles an hour under my tenure. We got a car-free Central Park under my tenure as a community board chair. And we had multiple intersection pedestrian safety efforts that were initiated during my tenure as a community board chair. That included the 66th Street bow tie, 59th Street, and all the work that continues to go on along the 95th Street corridor. Those are very specific things I think whoever gets elected to become borough president really needs to focus on a very neighborhood approach and a block by block approach. And it's something I've lived and worked on for my entire career. So I'm excited to talk to you about your questions and really hoping that we can do whatever we can to make sure that we expand the work that largely started under the Bloomberg administration. And again, Jeanette Static-Khan is a big mentor of mine and somebody who I think has really expanded the streetscape, but something that we need to continue to do and think about responsibly, but taking a very neighborhood by neighborhood approach. So thank you for your time.
Oh, sure, Elizabeth. So where do you what do you see as somebody who rides a bike and is out there on the streets? What do you see as those sort of next steps? I mean, with Jeanette, we were doing parking protected bike lanes like the ones you worked on Columbus and Amsterdam, and under the current administration, we're much more in the sort of plastic stick, running over plastic sticks sort of mode of bike lanes, and that's the only protection that's offered now on Central Park West, for example. So where do you want to see this go?
Look, I see people all the time going up Central Park West, and I mean, full disclosure, I live on the Upper West Side. I take my dog into Central Park every day. We bike into, I biked across town today. What I will tell you is that the plastic bollards do not work. I see people weaving through them like it's in a sort of an agility course like you would do. It's not enough for people right now. We need to have full-on concrete bollards and fully protected bike lanes. And I think one of the things that has been really complicated that, again, requires an executive to handle is how we focus on parking and whether those are protected parking lanes, how we work on making sure that they are the safest as possible. And I lived and breathed the situation with the woman who died during the Central Park West bike lane tragedy. There are ways, again, we got the car-free Central Park. We need to make sure Central Park West is safe and accessible to everyone, and we need to make sure it's the safest possible egress going north. And again, Columbus Avenue goes south Amsterdam Avenue goes north. And what I want to make sure is that we are looking at neighborhoods now that I'm running for borough president, making sure that we're looking across neighborhoods and not just the Upper West Side on how we can implement things as safely and responsibly as possible.
So in some of your materials, you talk about, infrastructure management. And, I'm seeing places like London and Paris build fully curb separated bike paths in their streets within a few years. And in New York, we have very, very few of them. And one thing a lot of people don't realize is DOT's protected bike lane program is kind of a stand-in for the fact that we never really rebuild streets in New York. And to the extent that we do, we just rebuild them the way they are, like 9th Avenue, right now. So, and, like people like Regional Plan have talked about sort of an interim thing, like an arterial bikeway that could be built, or maybe a hybrid between something that's kind of a DOT style and something that's more, harder infrastructure. But is that something you would be interested in tackling? Is, why can't we rebuild streets effectively in New York?
100%. And again, my whole career has been built on municipal infrastructure finance. This job is going to require somebody who has not been a lifelong politician or a career politician. It's going to require somebody who has actually worked in the field of infrastructure. Nobody's done that more than I have in this field. I worked for more than a decade before joining the World Economic Forum, trying to rebuild street safety, rebuild our roads and bridges and tunnels across the country. At the World Economic Forum, I do it across the world. We're looking, quite frankly, about how cities are doing it better than New York City is. And what we're going to need is a champion who's going to champion those issues and is going to do it better and safer than anyone else. And we need to restore New York City to the leadership that it deserves. When it comes to 9th Avenue, I bike down there, I walk down there, I took my dog down there to a veterinary appointment just a few weeks ago. It's terrible. It's the worst infrastructure we have that's going on right now. It's terrible for cyclists.
It was it was the original protected bike lane, and there's no plan to sort of improve it with whatever when this water main is finished. They're going to put it back the same way.
But they've been saying that for like years now, and we've been working on it for years. We've been trying to connect. One of your questions about how we connect. I think one of the biggest issues with community boards has been how we connect different neighborhoods. So something ends at 59th Street and then we don't think about it. But there need to be absolutely 100% connected lanes, whether it's up and down the east side or up and down the west side. And that is something that I will continue to prioritize and needs to be something that is 100% working, whether it's with check peds, whether it's working with the folks who are on the far west side who are really focused on that. That's something I would 100% prioritize.
What are there other specific projects you would want to become champion of as BP?
Sure, there are so many things that I care very deeply about. I think again, the borough president really has the ability. I think for everyone who is voting and who's listening to this call, the borough president has three basic responsibilities. They are non-ideological. They are things that are very get down to work and get things done. One is being a champion for the borough. One is focused on land use and zoning. The third is on community board appointments. And I know we're going to talk about that later. But on this second
let's
point,
talk about it now because time is running down since you mentioned it.
Sure, of course. So just on that piece, again, I think that how we work, I'm the only candidate in this race who's chaired a community board for a really long period of time. I care very deeply. Again, I just want to go to one point before I do that. Congestion pricing and how it will impact cyclists is going to be very important. If that hasn't been mentioned yet in this conversation, it needs to be. Below 60th Street in the central business district in this city needs to require somebody who knows how congestion pricing is going to get done, and hopefully somebody who can make it happen responsibly. Open streets, taking a neighborhood by neighborhood approach. On the community board question, I believe very strongly that community boards need to be nonpartisan. I have stated that entirely during the time that I was a chair. They should not be influenced by special interests. We need to reflect the diversity of our neighborhoods, neighborhood by neighborhood across Manhattan, both in membership and in board leadership. And that, when it comes to cyclists and the cyclist community, that directly impacts many of you who are on this call. We need to make sure that you are all represented and that board members across all opinions are willing to work together and bring about mobility solutions that provide new, innovative options for getting around this city, effective mass transit, which I've mentioned before, and provide the efficient and equitable movement of people, goods, and services throughout Manhattan. Manhattan is the densest of the 5 boroughs. We need to make sure we're providing transportation and transit options for everyone, and that includes the bike community.
Fantastic. What, in addition to street design, building things, community boards, are there other sort of policy things you want to dig? I mean, congestion pricing is a really good example because, it's kind of a one-time opportunity to recover a bunch of space, right? If traffic drops, as expected, as price goes up, demand falls. That only happens once. I mean, occasionally we may raise the price in the future, but say in London, the big drop in traffic was once. And we still haven't ever seen like a city scenario for what do we do in the one time? Are there other policy areas that, we should dig into that you would research and champion?
Sure. Again, I think we need to be thinking about how we continue to keep as much as Manhattan as possible car-free. I think the issues related to how during the pandemic, coming out of it, bicycles are a solution to some people. City Bike is a solution to some people. But for many people in the city, especially the essential service workers, a lot of them who came into the city in the midst of the pandemic, a lot of them didn't even have credit cards and they couldn't get on a City Bike. They couldn't, access transit from Far East New York, because it was unsafe. So we need to be providing like a broad range of transit perspectives for everyone. And nobody's going to work harder on the issues of transit than I have. And I see from my life experience from having worked at the World Economic Forum, where we do this every day, and we look at how there have been equity divides in how mobility works across cities in cities around the world, that we need to make sure that we're providing options to bring the city's economy back, I keep talking about Manhattan being the core, and I say it C-O-R-E, the core of the Big Apple. It really is. It's the economic engine, and we need to make sure that we're providing a wide array of mobility options that accommodate everyone in this city, including those who have really helped and served us the most during a very critical time. So whether that's a worker who is going in one day a week into Midtown, or somebody who is a delivery driver somewhere on the Upper East or Upper West Side, or up in, Inwood, we need to make sure that we are providing the best infrastructure for them, and somebody who has the executive experience and the leadership to be able to provide that for everyone as we build back our city.
Elizabeth, we're running down on time, but thank you so much for being with us, for speaking to our public, our members, and allies, and for being out there talking about these issues.
Yeah, I'm going to be a big ally for all of you. If you need any information from me, my colleagues can put it in the chat, but I'm always available at elizabeth@elizabethcaputo.com. Our website is elizabethcaputo.com. And again, would be grateful for your support. And nobody's going to be a bigger champion for transit and transportation and for Bike New York. So thank you very much.
Great. Best of luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Without any respite, we are going to blaze further ahead into our next candidate, who is State Senator Brad Hoyleman. He's represented the 27th District in the Senate since election in 2012, covering much of Lower and Midtown Manhattan. Previous chair of Community Board 2 in the Village. Now candidate for Borough President. Senator, welcome, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Really good of you to host this event.
Well, why don't we dive right in? How do you see the Borough President's office advancing street safety and a better connected bike network?
Well, I think it's important when we look at the candidates for Borough President, we look at their record, and the office is crucial. And I'll talk about that first. It is the planner in chief, the convener in chief. the bully pulpit, the land use, the opportunity to raise issues around safety involving cyclists, pedestrians, and traffic. And it's something I've done, John, in my record, passing over 120 bills in Albany. But not everything is legislative. I worked with the state to lower the speed limit on the West Side Highway. I've sponsored legislation to make speed cameras more plentiful. In fact, I want to see them universal in Manhattan. I was the first elected official to publicly request a study for the 14th Street busway, which I'm proud to say is working incredibly well and needs to be replicated, not just on 181st Street, but elsewhere. I've been an early proponent of congestion pricing. In fact, worked on it professionally in my job before I got elected to the Senate, but have always supported it as the chair of Community Board 2 in Manhattan, where I served for 3 terms, as well as 10 years on the local community board. And I've been advocating safe cycling, in part because, John, it was outside of my office where Dan Hanigby was struck and killed, directly there on 26th and 8th Avenue. So
Yeah, I remember.
I've been fighting for crosstown.
Yeah, I meant to mention that
cycling.
you died in with all of us in Washington Square Park in that very tough summer of 2019 when we had so many cycling fatalities.
So the borough president can make cycling and alternative modes of transportation and mass transit a priority. Just as I've been doing my entire Senate career, I want to continue that as the borough president. Look, I'm originally from rural West Virginia, grew up in a small town that didn't have any buses or mass transit, but I've never owned a car, I'm proud to say, and still don't own one here in Manhattan. I really want to look to a car-free future for our borough. And I think if we make our community boards more understanding of bike lanes and the need to have protected bike lanes, we'll see them continue to flourish, and we'll see the expansion of cycling and safe cycling throughout the entire borough and indeed the city. That's the path that I really want to chart as the next borough president.
Specific projects or places where you would become a champion for these things, or bike lanes you like that you think should be replicated, or some that we need to have some do-overs on?
We certainly need more protected ones. I'm concerned about West Harlem, and of course, my colleague was just mentioning 9th Avenue. We need to expand them and make them, more available on cross-town streets. I use the crosstown bike lanes all the time, getting around my Senate district, which is compact compared to many. But one of my colleagues upstate was bragging about the fact that she represents the North Country. It takes her 4 hours to drive from one end of her district to the end. She represents the part adjacent to Canada. I tell her I represent both the east and west side of Manhattan. Sometimes it takes us 4 hours to drive from one side of our district to the other. But we can address that with busways. I'd like to see one on 34th Street, 42nd Street, 57th Street. I really want to spread that pretty wide across Manhattan. And I want community boards that represent that kind of pro mass transit and cyclist mentality.
I mean, we've had also, speaking of good infrastructure in Manhattan, we've had pretty robust looking greenway plans since about the early 90s. And, I think City Hall talking about, at least a waterfront greenway, all around the borough since about 2004. Is there a role for the borough president in sort of speeding that up and finishing that off? Yes,
we've been talking about that in my campaign. A greenway across the entire perimeter of Manhattan would be a really great statement for cyclists, and I would think the entire world, about how we've adapted to cycling. I mean, I'm really proud that we've now outpaced Paris in terms of our bikes for hire. And, I want to see more companies spring up in the space, not fewer. I don't think city bikes should have a monopoly on it. And, every opportunity to have a bike around the corner from where you live should be a right of a New Yorker who wants to get across town. And it's something I'm committed to, and something I live as someone. I don't have a bike myself, but I am an ardent city bike user.
I've seen you on them. Yeah, and that's the idea. Not everyone has room or wants to make room for bikes, but
yeah, I don't have a place to park it
right.
in my apartment.
Well, we do have some companies springing up now saying, they want to provide protected bike parking for New Yorkers. And so far, the city hasn't been able to get out of their way and let them.
Well,
flourish.
I'm fighting for bike parking as part of the new Empire Station Complex plan, which is something I feel very strongly about. I got Amtrak, wrote to Amtrak when I was a senator to force them to take bikes on the trip to Albany. And I'm also going to fight for sensible development, which is part of our plan to make streets safer too. The Empire Station Complex plan, I don't know if you've read much about it, but it's it's a bonanza for developers and doesn't do much for mass transit. I'm going to be leading that fight in the Senate. I've introduced legislation that would clip the governor's wings and his ability to do whatever he wants to do in terms of trying to slot in 20 million square feet of commercial office space around Manhattan. I want to run that process through ULURP and ensure that our city and our community boards have a seat at the table. I have legislation that I hope to pass this session to do just that. And as borough president, I'm going to lead that effort.
It's kind of astonishing because, one of the real hallmarks of places that have pretty sustainable transportation is putting bikes and trains together. And we have both now in big numbers, but there's no program by the city, by the MTA, by anybody to do that. And, I love the idea of intervening in the Penn Station, the Penn Station project to do more of that. But it seems like bike parking, is kind of a policy area that's just fallen off the radar completely in the last.
Yeah, we should be requiring bike parking as part of as part of ULURPs and new commercial development. I've got an idea to work with the borough presidents across the city to set standards around climate and resiliency. And I think bike parking should be part of that when it comes to new commercial development.
Cool. So you're a community board veteran, like some of your competitors in the race. What how do we situate the idea of street changes? Many of you guys are calling for fairly radical approaches. You're talking car-free Manhattan at some point. How do we situate community boards relative to making real progress on those things?
They need to be representative, and we need to continue to reform community boards. I'm going to re-embrace the notion that we should have independent screening panels for community boards made up of civic activists, advocacy groups like yours and others to weigh these applications and take the kind of partisan nature out of them. Secondly, I think we need to reform the community boards by removing lobbyists from them. Believe it or not, paid lobbyists are eligible to serve on community boards, as are the paid staff of elected officials. I think we need to end that. And third, I want to institute something that's known as the Rooney Rule, where you interview a certain number of diverse candidates to ensure the diversity of the pool that is ultimately selected. We have an underrepresentation of women, of folks who only have a high school education, of transgender people, of young people. I'm proud that I co-sponsored the bill in Albany that allowed 16-year-olds to serve on community boards. I want to allow 16-year-olds to vote in municipal elections. So the long and short of it, John, is we need to replenish the well of the pool that community board members are chosen from.
Fantastic. Anything else you want to sort of relate to us in terms of projects, policies, things you would, sort of break out or, keep the new mayor's feet to the fire on?
Yeah, well, the borough president is should be an advocate for the borough, and that includes being a check on the mayor and being a check on city services. I have an idea for what I'm calling borough stat, where we act, you have CompuStat, for example, that looks at crime and police responses in different parts of the borough. I want to do that with city services, and that would include the Department of Transportation, whether sanitation is keeping trucks on side streets as they were in my district for over a year until I wrote a bill that got de Blasio to move the trucks off of the side streets. I want to continue to crack down on idling and double parking. And I want to be in the central conversation about congestion pricing. That's going to be the most important conversation involving our streetscape in a generation. And we're going to have public hearings that are robust, that bring people to the table, but also have a point of view. John, we can't just leave the decisions around congestion pricing to the NIMBYs and many who would want to undermine its effectiveness.
Yeah,
this is so key to sustainability, to keeping our streets safer, to ensuring that the generation of New Yorkers who really I'm fighting for, my daughter's generation, have a Manhattan that is livable and safe and protected from rising sea levels. This is something that we can in part do through a sensible approach to congestion pricing.
No, I think that's great. Bike New York and Transalt have been seeking a plan for from the city for, even if it's under the MTA's aegis, it's going to be a one-time big drop in traffic, and we should do something to take some of that space when that opportunity presents itself.
A lot of my colleagues are, they want the congestion pricing zone to be expanded to their neighborhoods. And I think that's a great idea. It shouldn't just start at 60th Street. Why should just the heart of Manhattan have the benefits around environment and health and street safety? We need to expand it further. So that's going to be a goal of mine as borough president, to make it as widely available to Manhattanites as possible. But you're going to have a borough president who knows how to work not just with the city, but with Albany to get that done. Because unfortunately, John, so many of our laws here at the municipal level are dictated by Albany. That's why I'm fighting for Sammy's Law. That would finally give New York City the opportunity to lower speed limits on side streets. Believe it or not, that's done by senators in Buffalo and Binghamton instead of Brooklyn. We need to have that power here in the city, and that includes speed cameras too. I want speed cameras to be as widely dispersed as possible. I'm also working, John, to pass a bill this session, which is called the Furious Act. That means Fighting Urban Racing in Our Streets Act, named after that classic film, The Fast and the Furious.
Yep, we have them in Greenpoint too.
Yes, which would allow speed cameras to be turned on in off hours to catch these jackasses that are speed racing in different parts of Manhattan.
Senator, we've run down on our slot, but thank you so much, Brad Hoylman, candidate for Manhattan Borough President. We'll see you on the street. All the best on the rest of the campaign.
Thanks so much. Good to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, take care.
Okay, all the best. Bye.
All right, we are jumping now to, oh wow, look at the so many good props tonight. But the first cycle where. So Ben Kallos it's hard to think about a greater friend in the city council than we have had in Ben Kallos. He's been representing part of the East Side since his election in 2013. He's been an advocate for filling in key gaps on the 2nd Avenue bike lane. He's hosted all kinds of bike education stuff in his district. He's tracked bike crashes in his districts and they went down. He's been out there on more space for bikes and walking on the Queensboro Bridge. I'm sure I'm forgetting some stuff, Ben, that you have done or are doing. Thanks for all you're doing, and tell us how you want to sort of build on that record as borough president.
Thank you so very much, John, for having me, and for all of you for tuning in. I'm Councilmember Ben Kallos, and I don't own a car. This is my Grand Fondo jersey because I couldn't find my Bike New York jersey from all the time.
I was going to say it's a little off-brand, but
yeah, you guys promote it. That's how I found out.
I know.
And I'm actually hoping that the next time we do this, we can do it as part of a long ride. And when we do our water breaks, you can ask candidates questions. And I want to thank Bike New York. I haven't missed a 5-borough bike tour, even when it rains. And it really sucked that we lost it for 2020. And I pledge that I've already done it every year. As borough president, I will keep doing it every year. And some campaign promises on the Bike New York. 1, more of the Bronx. 2, more time. And with that more time, we'll have more room for more riders and more funds raised for bike education. I would promise to start in Staten Island instead of leaving it for the very, very end, but that's not a promise I can deliver on.
We've been pushing for all of those things, but
Really?
so far we haven't had,
I never brought it up about swapping the route.
right.
I would love to knock out the bridge at the beginning instead of the end because it is so killer.
Yep.
But what do you call it? I got elected in 2013 in a district where, when I spoke to residents, biking was one of the number 1 issues, and not necessarily in a good way. And so the first thing I did is I got everyone together and I asked Bike New York, Transportation Alternatives, Streets PAC, NYPD, DOT to all come into a room, and then I locked the door. And I said, how do we make it safer for pedestrians, cyclists, and even motorists in my district? We created a bike safety program, and I can tell you that it is safer today to be a pedestrian or a cyclist, and actually even a motorist in my district. I'll tell you a little bit about why. One of the things that we've been doing is, as co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, we started a bike to City Hall. We've done one every year except in 2021, when, of course, April, we were already in the throes of the pandemic. I pledge that if we can do a bike to work day as people start to return, I will do it again to City Hall before the election this year and every year as borough president. In fact, if you missed it, we actually did the first of its kind New Year's Day bike racer, I think, or the day after. I called it a polar ride, and I hope you'll join me. When I first ran for office, City Bike wasn't a thing. City Bike had been announced in 2009. I came out and said, I love it, let's do it. Let's do it for the entire East Side, let's do it for Roosevelt Island. And it didn't get rolled out till I was an elected official in 2014. And even then, we still lost it on Roosevelt Island, which for some people might not know is part of Manhattan, but it's governed by the state. We actually worked. We actually had to fight 3 different owners of City Bike to get it until we finally were able to get it on Roosevelt Island with Lyft. If you didn't know, I actually have a City Bike rack in front of my district office. That's how much I love City Bike. I have a founder's key. It was one of the best things we did as a city. It makes my life so much easier as a cyclist. Our bike safety program included buying bikes for the NYPD, because in that meeting we said patrol bike lanes because of that giant van behind John Orcutt's head. And they said, well, we don't want to because it's either a beat cop thing or a car thing. And we're like, what if we bought you bikes? And they said, fine, we'll do it. And we got cops on bikes, and then they drive, they take pictures of these vehicles, they issue the violations. As John alluded to, we do a safety class in my district office. We do it in my schools. We did it in my parks, but in my district office once a month. And once the pandemic is over and we can do things in person, they'll be back and you'll be able to get a free month on your City Bike annual pass. And then let's just talk about bike lanes. It was about bike infrastructure. That was one of the big things we did. we only had one protected bike lane on my district on First Avenue. We got the Second Avenue bike lane that is protected. We got 2 additional crosstown pairs. We closed the gap so that Second Avenue would be protected below the 60s. We put in 150,000 between me and Keith Powers to buy plows for bike lanes. And as Lindsay was mentioning, we paid for it and DOT won't buy them. And it's something that even mayoral candidate Catherine Garcia was like, if you make me mayor, I will do it. And I'm not endorsing anyone for mayor, but we were working together on that for years. And this mayor won't do it. And the next one needs to take my money and plow the effing bike lanes and the intersections to make it so safe. On CB8, we really changed the makeup of the board. I actually authored a resolution with Gail Brewer for 16-year-olds on community boards. And I want to thank Brad Hoylman for his support in Albany and following our direction and following our lead and getting it done with the prime sponsors of that bill. Most recently, I was able to, because of all the pro-bike folks we've been able to get onto the board, we passed a resolution in support of protected bike lanes across town on 61st and 62nd. Another key piece that I'm incredibly proud of, because it took 7 years, is we worked with the original QB6. These are people who got arrested way back when, actually, and John Orcutt is one of them. But one of the people is Charles Komanoff, with whom I've worked with on congestion pricing stuff. I didn't know he was part of the QB6. I didn't know I was consorting with people who had been arrested for civil disobedience. But they were the reason we got the first bike lane. And now we were fighting for a second. When I put my money where my mouth is, and then Mayor de Blasio said he would do it. And we won a safe crossing for not only Queensboro Bridge, but Brooklyn Bridge. And we've also secured more than $500 million for the Greenway from 51st Street in my district to 125th. And now Mayor de Blasio, as part of all the work we've been doing, has announced that he's actually fully funded the Green Ring around Manhattan. Now, I'm running for Manhattan Borough President because despite safety gains in my district, and that's only because if Department of Transportation know they have an ally in the council, then they're going to show up and do all their work there. And that's why you've seen a lot of the east side of Manhattan getting filled in, while the rest of Manhattan, northern Manhattan, lower Manhattan isn't seeing that same treatment. And so when I'm borough president, I want to bring that same infrastructure. I want to expand protected bike infrastructure throughout the borough. I want to widen bike lanes on 1st, 2nd, 3rd throughout. I want to see bike parking on every single block and anywhere we can. We've actually started to do it with the rings. I want to ensure that the project that I've gotten funded actually get built, because one of the things the city is famous for is funding the 2nd Avenue subway 100 years ago and then never doing it. So whether it's getting the Queensboro Bridge done and Brooklyn Bridge, getting a safe crossing for the Midtown Tunnel, because if you've ever been past it, it's a death trap. Fixing the Riverside Drive. There's actually a detour that I've been on that takes you up a hill and then into traffic where I almost got hit by 2 cars and then back onto the drive. People have different names for what they call this mountain, but I want to make it gone. I want to implement congestion pricing, and I actually want to go further than just looking at the 700,000 vehicles that go into the central business district. I want to toll every vehicle entering New York City, which is 4 million of them. And just like Thanos in the Avengers, we could get 1/4 of the vehicles off the streets with the snap of a finger. And I don't think that the Avengers would reverse that. I'm a nerd. You'll see that jersey soon. And one thing I'd just say is I don't own a car. I've never used a parking placard. I'd ask you that you ask every candidate to share their license plate number today, because you've got elected officials in this race of using placards, speeding through school zones, and parking in bike lanes, which should be a disqualifier. I'm running to become borough president so I can be safe, just safe biking anywhere in Manhattan as I am in my district. I'm doing this for you. I'm doing it for myself. And I'm doing it for my 3-year-old daughter who has a 3-wheeler with the little handle on the end. And we go down the neighborhood and I say, pedal, 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 ring, 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 steer, steer, steer. But quite frankly, a big piece of it is every time we see a curb cut, I say, there's a curb cut. And then I say, look left, look right. Do you see a car? And just knowing that even on a sidewalk, anywhere we're going, even in an intersection, if you're on a bike, even if you're a pedestrian, your life is always on the line. And if you want to ask about my motivation for all of this, it's I will do anything in my power so that people don't lose their lives because of an unnecessary traffic collision that could have been prevented.
So in terms of, if we're going to get congestion pricing, hopefully in the next few years, and, that should be an opportunity to claim some more space back. We may have a mayor who's making big promises on some of these kinds of issues. I mean, how do you see the borough president, advancing the agenda so we're not just running over, these plastic delineators or, or fighting, fighting block by block in the community boards? I mean, how would you sort of help frame this whole thing for New Yorkers so we're making progress and not sort of fighting over every centimeter?
There's two styles of leadership. They're the elected officials you hear about every day who show up to events like this and are like, oh, I'll do whatever you guys are telling me. Let me figure out and then there are folks who lead from the front. When we had that meeting in the room 7 years ago, and even beforehand when I was running, and I'll say it to everyone here tonight, trying to make it safer for everyone in Manhattan to use our streets, to reclaim our streets from cars, to make it safer to be a pedestrian or a cyclist, it's going to be hard. Ask anyone in my district. We've had 7 years of fighting at the community board, fighting at every level. We've been able to do it. And the way it started is we said, here are the programs we're going to implement, and here's what the bike infrastructure looks like. We did a letter to DOT outlining what we wanted to see from them. And over 7 years, they did it. When I get in, I'm going to work with a lot of the groups I mentioned, and there's some new groups that have come up, particularly those representing people of color who've been underrepresented in this conversation, and women who've been underrepresented. They've been joining me in the annual bike rides as they start to grow and become larger organizations. And I want to sit down with everyone, come together with a bike master plan that we could start and plant a flag and say, here's a place I think we can get to, and then bring it out to the community and see how we can make the idea even better, even bolder, and get it done. But I think the best way to do this is to lead from the front, start with a great plan. It might be too ambitious, it might not be ambitious enough, but at least we start from somewhere.
That's music to our ears. Ben Kallos, council member for District 5 on Manhattan's East Side, Manhattan Borough President candidate. Ben, thank you for your time. Thanks for your vision on this stuff. Thanks for your leadership over the past number of years. All the best in the rest of the campaign.
Thank you very much for having me. I hope folks will join me. We're at kallos.nyc. You can email me, bkallos@kallos.nyc, and call me at 212-960-3440. And we are doing a lot of small dollar raising. And if you want to take a ride, just give me a call. I'd love to ride with you sometime.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much, Ben. Okay, we are back. Mark Levine, representing 7th Council District on Manhattan's West Side since election in 2013. Former teacher, education activist, a community board veteran, chaired Community Board 12's Transportation Committee. Very strong record fighting for bus lanes in your district, even in the face of some of the usual debate over changing our streets. Champion of the extension northward of the Amsterdam Avenue bike lane. Helped us cut the ribbon recently on a new bike facility in Riverside Park. And as chair of the council's health committee, has really become a go-to for reason and clear information during the pandemic. Thank you so much for that, Mark, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, John. It's really a pleasure to be here and to have this conversation with all of you. I just want to start by thanking you, John, and your team at Bike New York for what you've done to help build this movement, to help make it safer and easier to bike in New York City, which is important for our environment, for our safety, for our economic development, and for our health. And as chair of the health committee, I'm a strong advocate of human-powered mobility. And Bike New York is making it possible, making it exciting. And I'm grateful for all you've done, and your impact is real. And thank you for mentioning some of my work as your ally in this effort. You know, I've taken on some really intense battles in my district to make it safer for people to use bicycles uptown. Those have not been politically easy. We redesigned Upper Amsterdam from 110th to 155th. And actually the community board adamantly opposed it. But because I felt that lives were on the line, I urge DOT to do it, and we've done it. We have implemented a fully protected bike lane on Central Park West all the way up. Again, controversial. I supported it without wavering for safety and other reasons. Earlier on, we had a big fight to put a dedicated bus lane on 125th Street. This was in my early days in the council. Simultaneously, we had a fight to redesign Morningside Avenue. We won both. And one thing that every one of these redesigns has in common is not only has it actually made those stretches of street safer, they've all been very popular after they've been implemented. There's such a lesson there that often the criticism melts away. And there's much more work to do. And I'm running in part for Borough President to help this ongoing re-envisioning of our street space so that we do get to the goal of 25% of our street space used for non-car purposes by 2025. And we're going to need physical redesign of our streets. We're going to need better enforcement of the 2,000-pound vehicles, which are responsible for an outsized portion of injuries and deaths on our street. We need things like bike parking to make it easier. And we need education. That's particularly important uptown, where many young people in my district don't own bikes and so haven't had the normal chance to learn to ride. And so the opening of Bike New York's education station in Riverside Park at about 157th, 58th Street is just an absolute welcome addition to our landscape. I'm so grateful that Bike New York has opened that great new facility uptown. If you haven't seen it, it's gorgeous. It's a big yellow box. You guys have a flair for design. And it's the kind of program we need all over Manhattan and New York City, especially for the kinds of low-income communities that I'm pleased to serve in the council. So excited to talk to you more about what's on the line for us as we go to vote and what is at stake for the borough of Manhattan, for our streets, for bicycles, for transportation, for our environment, for our health, and so much more.
I mean, when you talk about that kind of transformation and, 25%, which is a really big goal, what does that look like to you? Because it's still, we have a very general sort of debate over open streets in the city. But, when you look at cities that have, maybe decades or years ahead of us, they have pedestrian streets, pedestrian zones, really built out bike lanes that are curb separated, things like that. I mean, what is that the direction we should be going in, is sort of all of those things and figuring out, where they should go? And
well, we absolutely need a comprehensive and coherent network of physically protected bike lanes. And we don't have that yet in the borough of Manhattan. And an approach I'm taking to every aspect of planning here, from affordable housing to the siting of drug treatment centers, to bus lanes, to bike lanes, is to stop going block by block and taking these fights on only as they emerge, but to look for a comprehensive strategy. And nowhere is that clearer in bike lanes. One thing you see very quickly, if you zoom out to a borough-wide view, is there's really a horrible lack of options to move across town, across Central Park. We've seen the fatal consequences of that, tragically. And I do want to find dedicated ways for bicyclists to move across from east side to west side to east side, without having to ride in car traffic. This is one example. But more broadly, the options for reimagining our streets are limitless. There's so many public policy goals we can achieve using this precious street space. Getting mountains of trash off our streets by having dedicated trash containers. You have to make sure you don't obstruct bike lanes, obviously. Options there. Street vendors could take up parking spots instead of crowding out pedestrians on sidewalks. Opportunities for street furniture for people to sit and congregate and socialize, even to create miniature parks. And there's other safety features which simply prevent fatalities, like daylighting street corners. All of this needs to be on the table, and it needs to be, this is going to require prioritizing modes of transit other than cars. Finally, having a balance between people who are on foot, who use mass transit, who ride a bike, who are wheelchair users or in other ways using mobility devices, it's pretty exciting to think what we can do with our streets when we have a more balanced view of our priorities.
And it's interesting because you just mentioned stuff that falls under the jurisdictions of maybe 4 or 5 different agencies, when it parks, sanitation, some of the permit stuff for vending, commercial regulation, and DOT paints things and puts signs up. It doesn't really rebuild streets in physical ways. So, how do we? In my experiences, you can talk to somebody in one of these big agencies, and it's very easy for them to spend weeks and months never talking to anybody except in their own agency because it's so big. How do we sort of break down those barriers? And I think there are civic groups who've drawn graphics showing there's like 20 agencies who touch some piece of a block's infrastructure.
Yes, that's right. It's a huge number of agencies, and it's not just the ones you think of first. Yes, obviously it's DOT. It's parks for street trees and other features. It's Department of Homeless Services. Obviously, it's sanitation. It's consumer affairs. It's FDNY, and we need to have a borough president's office, which brings those leaders together. And the vehicle to do that is the Borough Services Cabinet meeting, which I will supercharge as the way where we get everyone in the room so no one can pass the buck, no one can point the finger. This happens again and again and again. I know you've dealt with this, John, where you go to one agency with the problem on the street, they point the finger, DOT points the finger at Parks points the finger at Design and Construction points the finger at EDC, and it's maddening. It goes round and round. I'm going to be a borough president who brings everyone into the room with the authority of the office. This is actually a role described in the city charter. Borough cabinet is a charter mandated function, and I will use it to make sure we have seamless cooperation and full accountability among the many agencies that impact public space, open space, and streets in Manhattan.
Are there specific projects, street segments or greenways or, anything in particular that you is sort of like first 100 days for you and sort of defining it as an issue? Or are there bike lanes, that you like and want to replicate, or bike lanes you want to, where you want to see a do-over? Anything, specific that's on your mind?
Well, I did look. I mentioned the need for east-west, west-east access across Central Park.
Right.
That will absolutely be a first 100 days priority for me. This is a party where there's safety on the line, where there's lives on the line, pretty clearly. I think this could be a win for the park too. That will be a top priority. I'm very excited about the 3rd Avenue redesign. I think it brings together so many of the elements of balanced human-centered streets. That will clearly be a priority for me. We have real holes in bikeability around both the Harlem River and the Hudson River uptown, and that needs to be fixed. And we have challenges in, to some extent, Riverside Park is a victim of its success as it's gained popularity by both pedestrians and bicyclists, and it's just getting too crowded. And we need in as many places as possible. We need dedicated space for bicyclists. I think we can do that particularly in the segments uptown I represent, which particularly north of the wastewater treatment plant. There's a little more room to spread out there.
Right.
So those are a few priorities where I think there's great opportunities, and I'll be working early on in my days if I'm lucky enough to be the next borough president.
Right. Fantastic. So, Mark, you've been on a community board. You've battled with community boards as a council member. Borough presidents help to really shape those boards. So what would your, what kind of policy would you be applying there? And you mentioned the idea of not fighting block by block anymore, but.
Yeah, look, I did a tour of duty of chair of transportation in CB12, an incredible experience. So I've been on the front lines on this. There's a significant underrepresentation on community boards in Manhattan of people who get around primarily by means other than cars.
Right.
And so I'm going to add a question to the community board application about whether you own a car or not. And if you've seen a community board application, you understand it is quite lengthy and asks many, many detailed questions about so many other aspects of your life. What kind of housing, what kind of job, what kind of union membership. It's all great. So that is a glaring omission. We're going to add a question on co-ownership. I want to make sure that the representation on boards reflects the representation in the broader community of modes of transit. I represent the council district where the co-ownership is about 20%, and those voices are disproportionately represented on the community boards, and it does impact conversations. So I'm going to try and have a diversity on the boards that gets the right kind of debate. And I'm not afraid to say where there is questions of life and safety on the line, it may be appropriate for a city agency to act without a community board approval. I hope that will be rare. I think the way to avoid it, John, as you alluded to, is a comprehensive planning process that brings everyone to the table so that we can see throughout our borough and our community where the holes in a safe bike network, bus network, street features that promote livability and human scale. Let's not wait until the next proposal comes down the pike. As borough president, I will convene that kind of borough-wide, proactive, comprehensive planning process. And I think that's going to do a lot to build support on community boards as well.
Fantastic. Mark Levine, council member for the 7th Council District, candidate for Manhattan Borough President. Mark, thank you so much for your time tonight. Thanks for speaking with us, and best of luck on the campaign trail for the rest of the next few weeks.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Bike New York. Thank you, everyone helping to fuel this movement.
Great.
It would be an honor to serve you as your next borough president. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. All right, now on screen and live with us is Michael Lewin. Michael is a law professor at the Touro Law Center in Long Island, writes extensively on land use, and now is a candidate for Manhattan Borough President. Michael, let me ask you, your website actually questions whether we should have a borough president's job, but you're running for the office. So what's up with that? What's up with
Yes, I mean, I think that, it seems like, the borough president's job doesn't really have like any of the coercive authority that the city council or the mayor has. And so I think I think about the things that the borough president does. I think some of these things could be done by city council people. For example, city council people could just as easily appoint community board members. I think in terms of commenting on land use applications, that's what city council people do anyhow. So I'm really not, I wonder if it really makes sense to have kind of this extra payroll and this extra bureaucracy that doesn't really exist in any other cities. Having said that, I realize that would require, I think, probably a charter amendment, that I do not have the political power to get anyone outside my apartment to vote for, and maybe not even anyone inside my apartment besides me. So I spend most of my time talking about other things and talking about, well, if I did have this job that maybe shouldn't exist, what am I really interested in? What are the things I'd want to be? Why I'd want to use a job as a bully pulpit for, how would I reform, for example, community boards? And let me just say that I've been really impressed by some of the things the other candidates have said. And I listened to Lindsey Boylan, who seems to have the most in-depth knowledge of biking of anyone, and seems to have biked more than anyone. I'm like, yeah, I'd want to talk to her if I was elected. And the council people who are running all seem to have a lot of expertise. Elizabeth Caputo seems to have done a lot. I'm really impressed by the records.
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the outset, everyone who's running is fairly friendly to the issues we're discussing, and that's a good place to be. But you've also written that you think traffic calming, narrower streets or lanes, and bike lanes separated from car traffic are things we should do more of, or things things that are worthy of government exercising its authority, even if you have a libertarian streak to you.
Exactly. So let me talk about the interaction of the tension maybe between my libertarian attitudes, because I am in fact the Libertarian Party candidate, and my attitudes towards street design and bike issues. So I begin with the assumption that the primary role of government Maybe even if I was a more extreme libertarian, I would say the only role of government, but I'm not sure I'm not really that extreme. But the primary role of government is really to protect people from the use of force, to essentially protect safety. So for example, that would include police, that would include punishment. And so probably even the most strict devotee of limited government would say, well, of course we need a police, and of course at some level of funding, of course we would need prisons and things like that, right? So similarly, it seems to be street safety is part of the government's role of limiting the use of force. That is to say, if I'm intentionally killing you with my gun, that's the use of force and government needs to get involved. Similarly, if I'm carelessly killing you with my car, which I don't own, but if I did have a car, I might accidentally kill somebody with it. So then government needs to be involved, not just to quote unquote punish that after the fact, through whether that's through criminal negligence statutes or through the tort system. Government also has a role in preventing that. And so for me, when I think about any of these issues, I think, do they make the street safer? Do they reduce my chance when I walk onto the street, did I reduce my chances of being hit by a car? So obviously street design is an easy case. Obviously my instinct is to favor narrower streets. I look at the 6, 7, 8 lane streets here that look like they're basically like right out of Los Angeles. I think, well, this is not ideal. These streets should be narrower. And so thinking about how bike lanes fit in that, well, to me, let me put it this way. I think many people think of the interest of bicyclists, cyclists, and pedestrians as opposed. I really think of cyclists and pedestrians having common interests, and I'll tell you why. So let's say, let's imagine you have a street that's, I'm not sure exactly, can't remember how wide, Columbus or Amsterdam or one of those streets is, but let's just say for the sake of argument, there's 6 lanes, which I suspect is right, give or take a lane.
Yeah, I mean, at least Columbus and Amsterdam have protected bike lanes as one of those lanes now.
Exactly.
Yeah. It used to be worse. Yeah.
Right. So, but imagining like we're making this decision when the bike lane was implemented. We're making the decision, in 2012, right? Or I'm not sure what year the bike lane was put in. But
like 2010-ish for Columbus.
Okay, so it's 2010. So we're deciding whether to have a bike lane. So to me, the best one argument for the bike lane would be, and maybe even the best argument would be, well, by taking traffic away from cars going 50 zillion miles an hour and giving that traffic to cyclists going 1 mile an hour, I'm sure it's probably more than that, but some much less rapid traffic. So it seemed to me that makes the street safer because obviously you have one less lane where pedestrians are exposed to people going 40, 50 miles an hour. So to me, bike lanes are really part of a pedestrian safety program.
Yeah, no, I mean, in fact, the city did studies of that stuff when it was first doing those kinds of designs and found that they were in fact safer because the crossing distance, they're with pedestrian islands and things like that, which were a little more robust in the early days than they are today. Yeah, absolutely, we're having those impacts. But I mean, it seems to me like you could almost make the case that the United States, if not New York, even though New York is worsening again, because of the level of traffic fatality and crashing and injury, et cetera, that we have, is kind of like a libertarian, experimental free zone as with regards to operating cars, the nominal quality of driver education, the extreme irresponsibility that the insurance industry doesn't impose on anybody. We're kind of there. I mean, we have like 4 times the traffic deaths of like the UK or Germany per person. So, are we already there? And maybe we need to sort of reel that back a bit. I mean, that we thought New York was going in that direction now, but with regard to parking, illegal parking is completely out of control in this city. And it's very hard to go out of the house and not see a car on a sidewalk, car in a crosswalk, car in a curb cut, not to mention bike lanes, which they've always been in.
Well, I mean, I think the United States generally, we really do have the worst of both worlds in the sense that in certain ways, in terms of, protecting people from automobiles, yes, I won't say our police have been defunded. The police are actually active, but they're not really very useful. which is, and how to change that is, of course, a long discussion in itself. And I'm not sure I have all the answers. But at the same time, government generally has done a lot to promote driving. And so I want to spend a little time talking about why is it that most of the United States is so much worse than New York? And the answer is, if you look at the cities or metro, actually, usually most of the statistics are usually by metro area, but if you looked at the cities and metro areas with the highest pedestrian fatality rates, the places that are much, much, much worse than New York, they tend to be very low density cities, number one.
Absolutely.
And obviously also cities with very wide roads, of course, which to some extent is true in New York as well, although it's not quite as bad here, I think. So that's to say, the cities that are the worst are the Atlantas, the Memphises, places where not that many people walk to not many places, and where everything is very far apart from each other. So I believe that if you want a city that has a low traffic fatality rate, it's not enough just to get transportation policy right. We also have to get housing policy right. That means instead of promoting suburban sprawl by basically having government say, no, you can only build 2 houses per acre, as is true in most of Long Island, government should be allowing as much housing as possible. Government should be allowing as much density as possible, because where there's density, let me give you a simple example. Let's imagine there's a supermarket, right? So if you have 100 people living within 3 blocks of the supermarket, that's 100 people who can walk to the supermarket. So if you have, by contrast, if you have 10 people who live within 3 blocks of the supermarket, that means only 10 can walk to the supermarket and the rest maybe drive.
Right.
And so I favor less zoning and more housing, not just, I write on my website mostly about how if we allowed more housing to be built, that would bring rents down, which I believe, but also I think if you had a city of 10, 12 million people instead of a city of 7 or 8 million people, we'd have more neighborhoods that were dense enough to support public transit, more neighborhoods that were dense enough to support walking, more neighborhoods that are dense enough to support cycling. And so I feel like this is where I differ from, I suspect, most of my opponents, at least most of my Democratic opponents. I don't really know too much about other Republicans' views. I think at least some of them tend to believe that the city has enough housing, except for affordable housing for poor people, and that it would be perfectly fine if we lost 1 million or 2 people.
Yeah, no, you're totally right on the facts about density and traffic crashes. The Deep South has some of the world's worst traffic fatality rates, the Deep South of America. But Texas is not among them because it has large metro areas like, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio that slow people down a little bit. But, in New York, we're still not nearly as good as, say, metro areas in Europe, where, drivers are held to a much higher level of responsibility for what they do. They're actually trained how to operate by people other than like random parents or, these sort of, nominal driver ed things that people do here. But so at Borough President, how do you sort of crack out any of this stuff?
Well, I think, first of all, it seems to me other than, obviously there is something of a bully pulpit element to the job, but I'm just thinking more narrowly about the 2 major things that Borough President does, or 2 of the 3 most important things. I think Elizabeth Caputo also mentioned being a cheerleader for the borough, but I don't think Manhattan needs quite as much cheerleading as Staten Island. I think we're fine in terms of cheerleading. If that was the word she used, which maybe I'm misremembering, but anyway, thinking about land use and community boards. So land use, the Borough President's major job is really to comment on zoning applications. In other words, to obstruct, basically. So a Borough President who believes the city is fine with 6 or 7 million people is basically going to say no, 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 no to almost everything. And I realize that's like an extreme case. I realize most Borough Presidents will be somewhere in between, the hypothetical super NIMBY and the hypothetical super libertarian, right? But my inclination is generally to say yes, yes, yes. So I really want more housing in the city. As I said, if New York could have 12 million people, I think that would be a really good thing. Certainly from a climate perspective, because those people aren't moving to Nashville or Houston and driving everywhere. And then, so the second element is community boards. And unfortunately, there was one idea, most of my ideas, actually, I feel like I'm stealing from other candidates, or maybe they're stealing from me, but they said them first. So they would probably plausibly say that I'm stealing from them. So number one, in terms of who I would appoint to community boards, obviously I would appoint people, I'd want to appoint people who are at least somewhat more pro-housing than many community board members, but also thinking about transportation issues. I really liked Mark Levine's idea of appointing more non-drivers to community boards. I think 77% of 77% of Manhattan households have no car, I believe, including this one. So I would like to have, I think on most community boards, I would like to have probably mostly non-drivers. I'm not sure I'd want to say 3/4 only because I don't really know who would be applying. But I think certainly 3/4 non-drivers would be a good goal to shoot for. I think and also in thinking about cyclists, I'm not sure I would want to set a specific number for cyclists, but I would at least want some cyclists on every community board. I mean, I think I'd want the cyclist voice to be heard because probably, let's say, you have 20 people on a community, 10 or 20 people on a community board. A lot of them will be people like me who don't ride bikes, who aren't really don't have that little in-depth knowledge of cycling. So we need to hear those voices. We need to hear, the voice of at least one or two people who really do a lot of who maybe commute to work by bike, or at least are really knowledgeable about biking on each community board. I think that would be a good goal to shoot.
Should the city, if a community board says like, no way, no how on this bike lane in this corridor, should the city respect that? Or should the city say, you can't opt out of a network. A network is a network, it has to connect. What should the city do in that case?
I lean toward the latter. I mean, I think my attitude toward local control is, well, let me put it this way. If you think about individual rights generally, well, what you do as an individual, you have the right to do things as an individual, but you don't have a right to hurt other people, right? Let's just start with that easy concept, right? Everybody can agree on that, I'm guessing.
Right.
So,
not some of the car drivers in this town.
Right. So similarly, thinking about neighborhoods. So similarly, you can say, well, every neighborhood has the right to control its destiny, or every municipality, if you think about small suburbs, have the right to control their destiny. But that right, to some extent, ends when it affects the interest of other suburbs or other neighborhoods. So when I think about, well, let's say if the neighborhood doesn't want a bike lane, I think generally it's kind of problematic from an environmental perspective, but let's talk about the network issue, because that's actually a much easier case. So you have if that refusal to allow a bike lane, to support a bike lane, makes it impossible for other neighborhoods to have a bike lane, and for other neighbors to be able, for people in the nearby neighborhoods to be able to use those bike lanes effectively, that's a factor that has to be weighed. In other words, I don't really believe that in kind of this absolute authority, absolute dictatorship of the neighborhoods.
We need you at a bunch of community board meetings this year.
Yes, I will.
Michael, we're running down on time, and I want to thank you for your time, for your interesting conversation. Michael Lewin is a law professor, lives in Manhattan, obviously, and is a candidate for Manhattan Borough President. Michael, thanks for being here tonight.
Well, thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, it was. Thank you. Best of luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks.
And now we're going to bring on the next candidate. In fact, our final candidate this evening. Kimberly Watkins is president of Community Education Council 3, which covers schools in the Upper West Side and part of Harlem, is a founder of the Harlem School Summit, and has her own company called In Shape Fitness, which sounds great to me. We can all use that. Kimberly, why don't you just dive in and tell us how you see the Borough President's office shaping better street safety and a more connected bike lane network for Manhattan?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much to everyone from Bike New York. Thank you to everyone who's listening, who's stuck with us. I'm hoping you saved the best for last. But I really appreciate the
And
time.
this is pretty good. Our mayoral forum went to like 11 p.m. or
Oh,
something.
did it really? Did it really? I know, right? That there's so many candidates running. I mean, it's a vibrant year, and I think one of the most important things, the responsible things that all the candidates can be doing to everyone in New York is saying, get ready, get engaged, think critically about all of the choices we're going to be making on June 22nd, because it's really important that we elect leaders that are going to move our city from where we are into a better new normal, into a brighter place. And I'm in the race because I'm really angry and frustrated and just full on fed up with my representation where I live in Harlem. As you mentioned, I'm the school, the elected leader of the school council, the elected leader of CEC3, which is what we call school boards in New York City. We neutered the school board democracy system in New York in the early 2000s when mayoral control was instituted. And I was elected to the CEC when my daughter was in kindergarten, because I came from a self-segregated community in Southern Virginia, in Tidewater, Virginia, in the 1960s. A little town created itself and cut one line off of one road out of the school board in order to prevent Black kids from going to the old white schools. And by the time I got to New York, many, many years later, and then became a mom, I send my child, I live in Harlem, I entered the school system, and what I find out with my daughter, she goes into this program that the schools in District 3 of Manhattan are even more segregated than some of the schools in the rest of the country in the South, where we believe segregation to exist. Here in New York City, we try to avoid the significance and the reality of that. And I've spent the last 6 years fighting for progressive policies in our school system under a sort of an umbrella organization that I actually think is very akin to the Manhattan Borough President's or the Borough President's office, with very little statutory responsibility, but a great deal of potential influence and a mover, shaker, a transformational figure if the person picks the right issues and keeps them in the air and really forges the pathway forward that will move us in a new direction. I managed to get 2 of the most progressive policies forward in the school system over the entire city in the last 6 years: the Upper West Side rezoning of 2016 and the first diversity initiative for middle schools in our city in 2017. So I'm really equipped in terms of understanding the mechanics of sort of uncharted territories with offices that are somewhat nebulous. And as you mentioned, I'm also a small business owner. I do less of that nowadays as a candidate,
Sure.
but I'm also a marathon runner. So while some of the other candidates, I know a couple of them were touting on social media how much time they spend on bicycles in their daily lives. I do spend the majority of my time on my feet. I'm a marathon coach also for the Road Runners Club and have coached the marathon in New York City for the last 11 years. So I've seen a lot of the miles and spent a lot of time focusing on street life and how much we need to do to bring it forward, to really make our city a pedestrian, cycling, multimodal transportation hub that we can be proud of. It's pretty bad right now. I've heard some of your comments, and I'm excited for the conversation tonight.
Well,
So
this behind me is one of our protected bike lanes.
Yeah.
On
Yeah,
paper.
not too many, right? Considering there are 508 miles of streets.
Well, the
in-
map is the nominal protected bike lanes. The picture is one of them, but it's
Okay.
not, it's protected, not protected. So you think that's one of the issues the borough president should pick off as one of those strategic?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a major issue that I've focused on as part of my campaign. Within the concept of my running, Run with Kim is my website, in fact, because I'm running
Right.
all 508 miles of Manhattan in order to make sure we see everything and talk to as many people as possible.
And what's one great story that you can relate from that experience? I know you haven't finished probably, but
No, I haven't.
what's
Well,
a good news thing you could say from that?
oh gosh, a good thing.
Yeah. Sorry,
The one thing I will say is that
nice.
when I've run in like sort of internally in streets where there are lots of small businesses that are eager to meet me and talk with me outside of their establishments, mostly like bakeries and coffee shops and so on.
Right.
They're really, really excited about the prospect of having new leadership in this city that have experienced the detrimental effects, the harm that regular New Yorkers have experienced. And that has really fed my flame as a candidate, because I'm the only real grassroots candidate in the race. I don't have the insider's kind of perspective of being in, official elected office, and I don't have a lot of high net worth individuals backing my campaign. I'm on the ground doing the work, and it's really exciting to talk to the mom and pop shops that are really, just like pushing forward.
Cool. What's one of the horror stories from your,
Well, I thought you were going to say that first, because the first thing
I'm
that
trying
came
to restrain myself.
Right. The first thing that came to my mind was my very first run was I ran the whole perimeter, right? I ran starting at Francis Tavern down.
The city actually removed a bike lane from in front of the Governor's Island Ferry recently, despite claiming they were going to complete the Manhattan Waterfront Greenway.
There's so much construction going on right now. And, of course, tomorrow's that vote, the city council vote on the development project at Governor's Island. I've been supporting the effort to oppose that work. And it's very difficult down there. But since I run that, area around the ferry terminals and around the museum and stuff, it wasn't too hard to navigate that piece. But what did happen was, two things. One was that as I was running along up the west side, before I got to what I really know, which is uptown, since I live in Harlem, I tripped on a broken piece of concrete and fell like flat on my face. And that was really painful for me personally, embarrassing. I got up and I continued running. And there were tons of people that helped me. So it ended up being kind of an interesting experience, because we talked about how much we needed all of our spaces to be safe. Now, obviously, there are cracks in concrete everywhere. So there's that. But the other thing that happened, and I find this to be really, really important to note, which is that when I get to the top, once you go past Riverbank State Park and into Washington Heights, and you cross over to the east side at the very tip of the island, there is a lot of really interesting space that is disjointed by a lot of industrial space that has been closed off. And so we had to navigate and really serpentine kind of like pattern around the roads in order to prevent in order to get to, the east side of Harlem, essentially down the East Harlem River and the east side. And that needs to change. We need pathways all around the city.
Agreed. I mean, some of the Harlem River waterfront has been kind of warehoused by construction sites and just used as staging for other construction, but like for 10 years, not just for getting in and out. One of the things we've been sort of stomping about lately is we think there's going to be a lot of federal money coming into the region because of the Biden administration and COVID recovery, but that the city doesn't have a sort of greenway plan that's ready to go. I mean, it was nice that the mayor announced some of the uptown and east side greenway stuff in his budget, but it's also like a budget of some guy, who's almost out. So, it's hard to know what to make of it. Talk to us a little bit more about, where you see the borough president sort of shaping these things. I mean, when you think about safe streets and greenways are important and getting them built much faster, is something I really want to see happen and I want to work on in the future. But like, what is, where have you been where you think we should replicate what they do versus say like the plastic sticks that everyone just runs over?
Where have I been personally? Like physically, what cities have I been
Yeah,
in?
yeah. Like, what do you like? I mean, I have mine that I
I
like.
wish I could say I've been anywhere, but I haven't been anywhere in such a long time.
Okay,
I'm a
no, it's a
mom.
fair question.
I have an 11-year-old.
Or what have we done over the years in New York? I mean, you can always find a little bit of anything in New York because somebody starts something and then it doesn't get done. But
I know, and I am not a big fan of the structure where this is sitting in the community board space. I quite frankly think we need to pull it out of our community boards. I have a decent amount of interaction with members of the community board that overlap with our school board.
Right.
And one of the really contentious debates that happened, I'm sure it was last year or the year before last, on the Central Park West Side bike lane, right? And how difficult that was. Now, I'm so glad that it went through, but what I think is striking is how much energy goes into those kinds of conversations when it really does need to be a no-brainer that we have cycling lanes that are protected all around the city, because people need to be able to commute and people need to be able to move safely. And we're not doing either of those. We're not providing either of those two elements from neighborhood to neighborhood. So if you have a community board in an affluent neighborhood where there are a lot of really vested volunteers that in some cases, enjoy the privileges of being able to volunteer many, many hours to do all of that work. And it's extraordinary the amount of work they do.
Yeah.
But then in other neighborhoods, there aren't enough volunteers to go through that extensive of a process. And so they get kind of, beat up on, and the issue gets swept underneath the rug. And we need a borough-wide and we need a citywide plan that allows us to move forward. One of the stats that I find kind of crazy is, right, we have 1.6 million people that live in Manhattan, but there are 2 million cars registered and there are 3 million parking spaces in our borough. So we are so still a car culture in Manhattan, despite the fact that we have a transit system that may or may not be, struggling still a little bit right now. I mean, I think it's getting better, but I know I have been avoiding the subway over the last several months. We also have, a lot of families on strollers. We have a lot of disabled individuals that are in wheelchairs and other mobilely challenged individuals that really need to be safe. So if cars are bullying the cyclists and the pedestrians, the cyclists end up bullying the pedestrians, and that's how we end up with cyclists on our sidewalks, and it's how we end up with, I think you mentioned in the last speaker's Zoom, how many accidents and fatalities we continue to experience. It's not acceptable. I mean, we need a plan, and it needs to be prioritized.
Fantastic. That's pretty much our time slot, Kimberly. So thank you.
Well, can I say one thing?
Yeah, please do.
Because I came up with this thought, right? I wanted, maybe you guys can tell me what you think about this.
No, go
because
for
you
it.
know how we have the borough tour, which was supposed to be last weekend, and we're not going to have it. But
Right.
one of the things that I would really like to do is something I would call Bike the Borough, where every weekend, I think we should do this every weekend, right? Because one of the things we need to do is promote the culture of cycling and the idea of the energy of being out more. And so I was thinking that we could draw a big rectangle from 14th Street up Amsterdam, across 125th Street and down Park Avenue. And that, like, every Saturday we would have a Bike the Borough giant space for people to.
I love that. I mean,
cycle.
Bogota, Colombia has been doing that every week for like 25 years now. And, we tried some of that under the Bloomberg administration. We have summer streets,
Right.
but it kind of died on the altar of police overtime and the massive staffing that the police tend to want to bring to these things. And so it ends at 1 p.m., which happens to be the shift change on, a Sunday. But I love the idea of doing a lot more, and also doing it in other boroughs, but also doing it uptown, or like the Great Rectangle could move around, right?
Yeah, it could, absolutely. And I think if there's a space to have a conversation about whether or not the police department, needs to be the sort of, needs to be as involved as they are, I think.
Well, the beauty of 2020 is that the Open Streets program showed us that wasn't true. And leadership at the city council kind of said, you guys are overstaffing the mayor's little Open Streets experiment. And it's it's pushing people out and making it difficult. So maybe we've overcome that. We won't know until January, I don't think.
That's right. That's
Or
right.
maybe sometime after that.
That's right.
But anyway, I love that. And the idea in Bogota when they started it was to create a buzz around changing streets. And that was the idea of Summer Streets in 2008 when we started that at DOT. So Kimberly Watkins, education activist, business owner, proud parent of several cats, and
and a daughter, right? I have one behind me.
and candidate for Manhattan Borough President. Kimberly, thank you for your time, and
You're so welcome.
all the best. And so I'm going to turn it back to my colleagues at Bike New York because we're going to wrap. But remember, we're doing this tomorrow for Brooklyn, and it's going to be great also.
Thank you so much, John, and just a wonderful conversation with all of the candidates. And you're right, we're doing the same thing for Brooklyn tomorrow. And I will put the link to register in the chat in just a moment. I'd just like to thank you, John. Thank you. This has just been wonderful. And I'd like to thank our audience. We have quite a few people with us who have stayed with us to the end. We really appreciate you. And if this is the type of programming that you would like to see, we would really appreciate you donating to Bike New York. Go directly to our website, www.bike.nyc/donate to do just that. When you do that, it means that we're on the right road and you're traveling with us on that path. We have a lot going on at Bike New York. We have Million Mile May, which is Bike New York's latest virtual cycling challenge. It's a free Bike Month event open to riders of all stripes and skill levels. No matter where or how you ride, Million Mile May is for you. Our goal is to pedal 1,000,000 miles, and we can do it. But we can't do it without you. So this is free. We want you to join and participate. And I'm going to leave a link to register in the chat as well for Million Mile May. We already mentioned about tomorrow. And I just want to thank everyone and the Bike New York team for a wonderful program this evening, and see everybody tomorrow. Continue to be well and safe. Always wear your mask and social distance, wash your hands. Good night, everybody.